Hi, my name is Felicity and today I will be taking you through 7 tools to build your Airtable front-end. So with that in mind, if you are a member of any Airtable or no-code communities, you will see this question come up almost daily. What tool should I use to build my Airtable front-end? So there are many answers to this question and you could probably start a flame war by mentioning particular technologies. So what I want to do is to take you through a few of them briefly today and tell you why I think they're good, where their limitations are, and so hopefully this will help you, if you're at this stage yourself, to decide what should I use. So before we kick off, I want to say that the technologies fall into 3 broad categories, and then there's a kind of extra bonus one on the end. But the 3 broad categories are CMSs, which have Airtable extensions. Secondly, Airtable specific technologies. And thirdly, web apps. So those are the 3 broad groups I would say any of these tools fit into. And then there's an extra one, which is a sort of Airtable plugin marketplace. So let's kick off with the first tool. And that is, perhaps surprisingly, Wordpress, when combined with this plugin, which is called Airpress. So Airpress is described as a plugin that integrates Airtable with WordPress, allowing you to use Airtable data the way that you want. So what are the advantages of using WordPress? Well, firstly, it's cost effective. It's free, which is great. It has a CMS built in. So if really what you want to do is build a website, a content-based website, and you want to augment that or supplement that with Airtable data, then the best thing to do is to start with a CMS, because that will give you all of those CMS capabilities out of the box, and then you can pull in your Airtable data on top of that. Thirdly, there's no data limit. So as we come through some of the other examples, there's a hard limit on the number of records you can use. There is no such limit that I know of. At least I've not hit it, I've used this myself with Airpress and Wordpress. And finally, you get design freedom. So if you can do it in HTML and CSS or with a WordPress template, if that's more your style, then you can achieve that with WordPress and Airpress. WordPress and Airpress, then you can achieve that. So those are some great advantages of using this tool. Some of the disadvantages, well, sadly it is no longer actively supported, I don't think. It is built by a guy called Chester McLaughlin. I wanted to get that right. And if we look at where the last updated 1 year ago, so that's obviously a huge problem because you may find yourself unsupported. Secondly, there are no query constraints. And what I mean by this is that you can loop through Airtable's tables and fields with this plugin, but you can't put filters inside those loops. There are some ways around this, one of which is to output, because you can use any HTML, you can output the values as class names and then use CSS to show and hide those fields, but you can't put the constraints within the loop. Thirdly, it's a little bit tricky to set up. There are some videos that Chester has made, some YouTube videos that you should go view. But once you add the plugin, there's a little bit of finicky setting up the pages and naming them and linking them up to your Airtable tables. So that's a bit tricky. And finally, there's no interface for this plugin. Once you set it up, once you link the pages and the data, you can use shortcodes within the WordPress editor, but you can't see. You're sort of doing it blindly in one sense, because you have to load the page to actually be able to see that data come through. So depending on your experience, if you know HTML, it's pretty easy to work out what's happening. But if that's unfamiliar territory for you, then you may struggle with this. The second option from the CMS category is Webflow, together with this plugin called Nobull. So Nobull is by the guys at Finsweep, and if you go to this address, Nobull Airtable Webflow.io, then what you will see, let's take you there, yeah. You can see a little brief overview of what this plugin does, how you set it up to pull in data. So this does have a cost attached to it. Webflow does have a cost. You'll probably be paying $36 a month, but that's for the business model. The reason you need that is to get the collections, so that the dynamic data for Webflow, they call it collections, and you'll need to use that, and you'll probably need for most Airtable bases some of the upper limits. So you'll probably most likely be using the business tier. And Webflow describes himself as a no-code platform for web design and development, and those are some of the strengths, as we'll see. So the pros, again, you get the CMS built in. If you want other people to be able to edit content, you get CMS with Webflow, and it's a great CMS. If you're familiar with it, it's beautiful. So you get that. You can add constraints. So using the collection data, you can turn things on and off for certain conditions, and you can actually see that within the editor itself. You can pull down, show me data for this record, and see that in context of the editor, which is great. You've got design freedom, just like with WordPress. If you can achieve it in HTML, CSS, then you can do it in Webflow. And moreover, in Webflow, you get some really beautiful presets and some of that stuff, which is great. So that great interface to use. What are some of the cons? Well, unfortunately, they're fairly heavy for this option too. You don't get in the API. So while you can use the Airtable data through the Nobull plugin, I hope I'm using the right words for these things, you've got to import the data. So Nobull does this kind of syncing. Webflow uses collection data, but only in its own database. So you have to pull in your Airtable data into Webflow's native database in order to use it. So you have to keep those in sync, which, as you imagine, can have a few difficulties that go along with it. The other big drawback, because I really explored heavily going down this line, is the collection limit, which is 10,000. So that's 10,000 records. So if you imagine yourself having many tables with linked fields between tables, each of those is a separate collection, and so one record which has links to many tables could very easily produce multiple records, and therefore you hit your 10,000 limit actually quite quickly. The Airtable base that I was using was already over the limit before I even started out, so that was a no-go for me. And then the other big blocker, I think, is that there's no native membership at the moment in Webflow. So if you want to use any form of membership, you have to add, I think, there's a few plugins, but MemberStack is the most popular. And then you've got to pay. It's not an insignificant price that you then also have to pay as well to use MemberStack. And MemberStack doesn't have emails. So registration emails, to be able to customize them. So there are some beautiful things about using this option, and there are some drawbacks. If you have data that is not that fresh, then and you don't have memberships and you don't foresee any sort of membership option, then this might be a really great way to design containers for your Airtable data, and that could really work for you if that's what you want to do. Now we move into the second category, which is Airtable specific tools. So these are tools that have been built to integrate with Airtable, because there's that gap of Airtable, that there is no front end, and so and nature abhors a vacuum. These tools have sprung up specifically to fill this void. The first of those I'm discussing is Softr. So Softr is, more expensive than some of the other options, but by far not the most expensive. So I've suggested that you might want to use the $65 a month, which is the professional one, because that includes memberships. If you don't need memberships, you can use one of the lower tiers. And Softr describe themselves as a no-code platform for web design and development. It's interesting the way that they describe themselves. So they've got that web design in there as well as development. Pros: if you go with the tier that includes membership, you get native membership, which is great. You can also add data constraints. So Softr is well supported and have been adding things, even in the last month, and have more things on their roadmap. And so you previously couldn't add, you were limited with the data that you could pull through to display. You couldn't sort of customize that too much, but now you can. So you can add data constraints. There's relatively little to no learning curve to use Softr. You get a beautiful interface where you can see drop downs of your Airtable data, and you can include what you want to show in the given templates, and so it's great. It's great for you to use, and I think they have a free. Well, they do have a free tier to try it out, so you can get in there. It's also component based. So if you think of a page, you can drag on particular components and build it up, which gives you greater flexibility in what you can achieve. There are some cons. There are relatively limited templates. I think you can start in the higher tiers. You can include some more custom styling, but you're still relatively limited in terms of the templates that they give you. Happy to be corrected on that. There's a record limit. So again, if this is a blocker for you, there's a record limit of 10,000. So yeah, leave it there. There are no user roles, so these are coming. So whilst they have membership, you can't group people into broad user role kind of categories to be able to show them certain data. You have to sort of assign things for individual users, which works well for, say, profile type data, but not so much for those broader user permissions. And there's no CMS, so you can pull in your Airtable data, you can put some stuff around it, but you can't really edit that extra content in a CMS type of way. You can with the previous. Okay, apologies for the blurry logo. One thing I also discovered is that these companies, as well as changing their features constantly, are also changing their logo. So if there's an outdated logo on this presentation, I know that there's one at least. I'm sorry. The companies keep rebranding themselves, so I'm just trying to keep up. So Pory, I'm going to say some nice things about them. So sorry for the blurry logo, but thank you, Pory team, for what you've brought us. This is a great I won't say budget because that makes it sound like it's not quality, but it is a great budget option. I use that word. Build membership portals and apps on top of Airtable. Again, this is an Airtable specific technology. So $39 a month for something that includes memberships. So what are the positives? What are the pros? It's cost effective. It includes memberships. Again, there's no learning curve. It's beautifully designed to drag and drop and see things happen straight away. And it's, again, also well supported. I would say Pory and Softr seem to be releasing new things, really active in their roadmaps and rolling things out. So that's great. What are the cons? Well, for Pory, even more so I would say than Softr, which we looked at before, they're very limited templates. They give you a portal way of viewing your Airtable data, a way of sort of branding it and theming it, but they really don't give you that much flexibility in actually the way things look. A little bit like if you think of a Bootstrap site often looks like a Bootstrap site. There's a look of Pory sites, but that's not where their focus has been. Perhaps that will be where they move to, but that's not where it's been in the past. So your styling is limited to sort of themes. It is also a no-code solution, so they don't really give you any opportunity to extend what Pory does. They give you what they give you, which is great, but they're really catering to people who just want to create a visual portal for their Airtable database and do that in a cheap, cost-effective way. And again, so there's no CMS attached with Pory. Stacker. So this is the final one in the Airtable specific technologies, and this was the first really that came to fill that void. They are the most expensive of the breed, $59 a month for their starter package, and they describe themselves as the easy no-code app builder. Just interesting to think of the words they use there, an app builder. So the pros, they've got advanced user permissions. So you can drill down and set specific permissions on pages, on views. So that's really helpful if that's what you require. They've also got a similar structure to Airtable in that if you look at a stacker dashboard or app, I guess, it feels a lot like Airtable. So if you're using something because you don't want to add extra Airtable collaborators, but you want to retain some of that Airtable feel, Stacker is great for that. So what are the cons? Well, it's expensive. It's one of the most expensive options there are. It appears to be designed or aimed rather more for a internal tool for sort of enterprises. At least that's where they appear to have positioned themselves. They don't have templates that I can see. I'm not so experienced in this technology, so that I can see they don't have templates. They have different views and ways of displaying data, but not visual templates, so to speak. And the styling is limited to themes. So this is much more data-centric. I'm probably not explaining myself well. Let me see if I can show you. So, they say create an app. So you see kind of the way they've got tab data and the way they have this left menu and these sort of different icons. It looks like creating a visual layer with permissions, etc., between your Airtable base and your users. At least that's what it appears to be to me. Okay, now we hop into the next category. I've only got one example in this, but there are others. So the one that I'm most familiar with is Bubble. So Bubble is $25 a month, and they describe themselves as the best way to build web apps without code. So what are the pros of Bubble? Well, it's got membership built in, and it's got quite a slick membership workflow that's built in. Again, there's no data limit. So if this is going to be a data limit is going to be a hard no for you. There's no data limit with Bubble. You can also add extra constraints, and you can add complex constraints to the data that you pull in through the Airtable API. You need to use an API because this is not an Airtable specific technology. There's a plugin as well that you can use that pulls in the Airtable data. And it's also extremely extensible. So if you are building an app with Airtable data and you have quite specific requirements of what it needs to do, and you are looking down the line at needing to do more things, then Bubble will probably be able to meet those. But there are some disadvantages too. So the learning curve. This is the steepest, I think, apart from perhaps WordPress, which has a less steep learning curve for the CMS side, but it's a little bit finicky for the plugin. This is one of the steepest learning curves. The other thing is that there isn't really a responsive grid, and I believe this is in the works. This is a kind of a real disadvantage. They sell it as a benefit of pixel perfect design, but really it's a little clunky. So you've got to understand why, but you drag things around, and then that generates absolute positioning on the page. There are a few ways of creating responsive designs. You certainly can create responsive designs within Bubble, but it feels like you're fighting the way that it's intended to use, which I think my least favorite thing about Bubble, and it's something that they are supposedly, well, they say they are, fixing, that they're going to create a new editor that is a responsive editor. But it's so baked into the way Bubble works. It's not a small thing to change. So I'll believe it when I see it. I look forward to seeing it, but I'll believe it when I see it. The second thing to say is the Airtable integration by the plugin is not great. It doesn't save states when you map fields. So when you go back to edit fields, you have to remap a lot of your fields, and that's just really frustrating to do. And finally, they say it's a no-code tool, and it is a no-code tool, but it's not a designer's tool. There is no visual editor, really. When you add things, you can change styles, and you can change styles quite a lot. Again, the way that they inject CSS and the output's a bit clunky, but you can make it look how you would like. But when you add the data on the page, because it's dynamic, and because the way that Bubble works is that you can really change what you put into those data fields, you can't visually see, apart from where things are on the page, you can't visually see what it's going to be like until you do the preview. So you sort of need to have a preview window open, which you can refresh to see what you're doing and how the changes you make display in that window. So yeah, the editor is drag and drop and visual in that sense, but you don't really get that design view. Say, for example, it's like the other end of Webflow. Let's see if we can show you how they describe this. Pixel perfect design. So here you go. So this is, for example, the way the workflows work, and you can see that although this is a no-code solution, it's the processes and the ways of thinking are quite tied into the JavaScript code which produces them. So it helps. You don't have to know code, but it helps you have an understanding of code to be able to use Bubble. And finally, our little bonus is MiniExtensions. So MiniExtensions is not a full solution. It's like a little toolbox of lots of Airtable plugins, and you get them all bundled together. So it's for $39 a month, and that includes, you can check it out, that includes lots of things like clever ways to do forms, etc. within Airtable, lots of little tools that you might find really helpful if you have some repetitive tasks in Airtable that you want to do, and it'll help you achieve them. So their byline is add features that you always wished Airtable had. So if you are using these tools already and you need an Airtable front-end, then you may want to use their Airtable portal plugin that they have within their suite. So the pros is it's bundled with lots of other Airtable plugins, and it has built-in editing. I've written that, and I'm not too sure what I mean by that, but apparently it's got built-in editing. The disadvantages are that it is limited to grid and gallery view, so it's really quite a limited portal plugin. It doesn't have themes, and it's kind of limited use cases of when you would want to use it. So if, again, it's easier to show you. That's unhelpful. Yeah, so here we go. So we've got this little video you can watch, but we've got the grid view and the gallery view. So you can see that they're pretty limited in the way that you view them. But you can, if you're using some of their plugins, and they have, I don't think it is, and they have some great plugins. So if you're using some of their plugins, then this may be an option that you would consider. And that's it, 7 tools. So do you use them? Do you have a favorite? Apologies, I'm not as experienced with all these tools. And so if I've misrepresented something, please jump on the comments and, call me out. I love to be called out for things when I'm wrong, mostly. And have I missed anything? Is there something new there that I haven't covered off that you think is exciting? Let me know. But I really hope that this video, if you are, as I say, one of the many people who is using Airtable and starting to consider what can I use as a front end, I really hope that this video will help you to do that. If it has, please subscribe to the channel. Let me know, and good luck in your Airtable journey.